Okay, so what is Phantasm? Well, it all starts with this really tall guy named Angus Scrim, and he's been capturing like humans, and then like when they're dead, he turns them into like dwarf zombies. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then one day, someone sees what's happening at the cemetery, and they, oh, what's that? Not that. Different. This Phantasm. Got it. Okay. What is this mystery ingredient Phantasm? What does it taste like? Is it an evil plot by brewers to take over the world? I don't know. Let's taste it, let's talk about it, and let's find out. So, have you had a beer with Phantasm in it yet? If you're a brewer or home brewer, have you brewed with it before? How did it go? Do you like the beer? Did you like the brewing process? Let me know below. While you're at it, hit like, subscribe, all of that. Hi, my name is George Thornton. I am an advanced Cicerone and a national ranked BJCP judge and beer traveler. And today we're going to talk about Phantasm and thiolized yeast and do a little tasting of this beer, which is from a brewery in southern France called Prizm. And the beer itself is called Migage. It's a thiolized DDH or double dry hop NEIPA, New England IPA, with K97, which is a yeast from a laboratory called Fermentis, and it includes some Phantasm in there. As far as the hops go, it is Motueka, Nelson, and Mosaic, and 7% alcohol. Very nice. So we're going to talk about this kind of Phantasm, and that basically starts in New Zealand. There's a guy named Joss Ruffle who owns a brewery called Garage Project in New Zealand, a pretty popular brewery. He is thinking about how all of the wine from the region, the Marlborough region of New Zealand, has this really beautiful passion fruit tropical notes to it. And he's wondering like, maybe there's something there. These winemakers have been kind of working on getting more of these sort of desirable characteristics for a while. So maybe they know something. Maybe that's worth looking into. So with more research, he basically realizes that the grape skins of the Sauvignon Blanc are very high in thiols. And at the end of the winemaking process, these grape skins are discarded. He thinks, well, this is a lot of potential, beautiful aroma and flavor, just kind of getting, not kind of, literally getting thrown away. Maybe there's something we can do with this. Phantasm, the product, is born out of that. So basically, for all intents and purposes, Phantasm is just dehydrated powdered form Sauvignon Blanc grape skins that you can add to the brewing process, and the thiols present in the grape skins will increase or provide lots of tropical fruit flavors like papaya, mango, passion fruit, etc. But that doesn't just mean that you can simply take some grape skins, dry them up, and throw them in your beer, and voila, you've got a more tropical beer. It's a bit more than that. Thiols are essentially aromatic organic compounds, and sometimes they can smell like onion and garlic, which we don't usually want, or they can come across as pineapple, passion fruit, citrus, papaya, etc. And we do want those aromatics. And if you have been paying attention to hazy IPAs or just trends in general in the beer world, everybody is looking for ways to push these sort of flavor aromatics. Also, interestingly enough, this is right around the same time that Italian grape ales kind of start to be, experimented with. So there might be a little bit of great minds thinking alike here, just kind of seeing what's around in flavors and what can be worked with. Now, the thing with thiols, you have the sort of unbound or like free form, readily available thiols, which are aromatic, but also very highly volatile. And then you have these basically locked up bound thiols, which are non-aromatic and don't really contribute anything to the beer. Thiols are present in malt and hops, grape skins, and other plants. And there's lots of essentially unused thiol aromatic potential in all of our beers. So that's where we start talking about biotransformation. So biotransformation is essentially transformation or the creation of aromatic compounds that would not have existed unless the right conditions were there. When we're talking about beer, the right conditions mean fermentation. So that means that some yeast are capable of essentially unlocking these bound thiols and creating aromatic compounds that we didn't think would be there, or at least creating more aromatic compounds than we might be used to had we been using a different yeast. While we have Phantasm on the one hand, which is this powder, we also have yeast that has the potential of unlocking these bound thiols. They use an enzyme that they naturally produce to do that. Most yeast have, sort of through genetic mutation over the centuries, basically blocked this ability to have that enzyme or to even use it. Now, there are some strains of yeast that are known for doing this. Beyond that, you can actually genetically modify yeast, or in fact, some yeast manufacturing laboratories have been doing that, most notably Omega yeast from Chicago. It's like magic or science. Biotransformation is a bit of a trigger word as late, in part because we've known about this for quite some time. It was honestly a bit of a trend of just sort of saying, oh, I'm going to add a lot of hops during fermentation so that biotransformation occurs. It turns out that you can't just intend for biotransformation to occur for it to actually occur. So that's where we get to projects like this from Prizm, where they are brewing with Phantasm, so adding thiols, and then experimenting with yeast strains that have been shown to have the ability to unlock those thiols. We can't really rely on our typical conversation talking about characteristic ingredients and history and process, because it's really just a new ingredient that has come into the market in recent years and that is being experimented with and played with. That said, the majority of the beers that are showcasing Phantasm are beers where they're trying to push a whole bunch of tropical fruit aromas. So that does tend to be your hazy IPAs, your juicy IPAs, your DDH, your double dry hop IPAs, etc. But there are a few kind of crispy lagers coming out, starting to use some of that. And I think it'll be interesting to see, as people start experimenting more and start to understand this process even more, how it's used in other styles. Perhaps there's a whole range of Belgian styles where this could be, I think, really interesting and really fun. So I'm looking forward to trying those. So even though we've been talking mostly about yeast and Phantasm itself and the hops that are used, the malt profile will tend to be a pretty pale malt profile. Some breweries do like to throw in a little touch of like more toasty, lightly roasted malts like Munich malt in order to give it a little bit more of a foundation to work with. We do typically find Phantasm used in the IPAs like we've already mentioned. It's also worth mentioning that the founder of Phantasm likens it more to MSG, and that it's really there to like enhance or bolster ingredients or profiles that already exist, not necessarily replace hop usage per se. That said, brewers do certainly note how much they appreciate saving some of their hop budget, being able to cut down on the amount of really expensive hops by just kind of supplementing with a pretty small amount of Phantasm. As far as when Phantasm is used, it's either added to the fermenter at the very beginning of fermentation, or some breweries note that they get really good results and kind of ease of use when they add it to the whirlpool. In other words, after the boil has been turned off before it's cooled down and transferred to the fermenter. So before we dive into the flavor profile of this beer and get into a brief review, let's talk a little bit about food pairings. Since we're talking about kind of juicy, hazy IPAs, very tropical fruit sort of things, I would say that you're really trying to showcase, or at least work with, lots of tropical fruit aromas. And you'll probably also notice that many of these beers are going to be lower on the bitterness, and so there's not going to be a lot of cutting power in terms of cutting through like fatty or really like creamy foods. That said, I do think some pretty mellow cheeses would be quite nice with this. A little touch of salt might kind of boost up that little kind of sweetness and maybe even pull out some of the malt character a little bit more. However, I'd be really careful about cheeses that are too creamy, because if you have a really creamy textured cheese and there's no like fat, or there's no like bitterness or anything else, or roast to like cut through that, you're gonna end up having this sort of creamy texture that's lingering. The texture of the creaminess of the cheese and the texture of typically these very like fluffy IPAs will sort of cancel each other out, because like will calm or cancel like. And then what you're left with is the alcohol is being exposed. So especially if you're having like an 8 or 9% double IPA, then you'll notice that alcohol kind of boost up, and that may not be very pleasant. In fact, I've noticed that hazy IPAs are probably my least favorite thing to pair with food. I just find that it's kind of flabby overall, and the flavors can be quite nice, but they tend to be a little too delicate, and food easily tramples over it and tends to just expose a lot of alcohol flavor and make it kind of unpleasant. But that said, I do think that it would be fun to try to introduce some sort of like malt-like characteristics, so like nutty or sort of caramelized sort of flavors. To that end, I would probably do like a salad that has a bunch of like harvest or like autumn roasted veggies on it, or just some roasted autumn veggies on their own. So things like, you know, pumpkins and squash and those sort of things. I think that those characteristics could play pretty well, and they're not too intense, so they'll leave the tropical fruit on its side. I would almost think of it as like making a sort of tropical dressing or like glaze that you're going to put onto those veggies, which could be quite nice, but you're just going to use the beer to provide those flavors instead. So that's probably how I'd approach this. I'll post some of the recipes that I found as I was searching for these images, but if you have any recipes that you're trying, or if you try anything at home, then share those below in the comments, because I'd like to try those too. So for our tasting, what I'm really going to focus on here is just sort of the key elements between the hops and the malts, and then we're going to talk about balance and just kind of give a brief overall impression. You know, I should start by saying the aromas were really jumping out of the glass, and that's always a really fun, nice experience. As you're pouring, you can just already get like papaya and mango and passion fruit and pineapple, a little bit of like lime zest and grapefruit and lemon zest, and there is a little bit of herbaceousness in there. I would call it more like some really fresh marjoram, or like even like a little fresh basil, quite nice. Even some kind of like plum, like really ripe fruit, a little bit of ripe banana, and like really nice ripe apple, a little bit of that bubble gum. So in terms of the aroma intensities, you know, the hop intensities are high. Looking for some malt characteristics in there, I do get some low honey and a little touch of graham cracker and kind of biscuit. So it does feel fairly balanced. And even in the color, I can see that we do have a little touch of malt profile in there. They weren't trying to make this too pale, which I really do appreciate, because I do enjoy having that balance between flavors. I don't like it when things are just sort of, you know, one note. Even if the notes include a lot of tropical aromas, etc., I like when there's a little bit of like balance and sort of tug of war between the ingredients. Okay, so for the flavor itself, again, very hop forward. The bitterness, as I was expecting with these styles, very low. I'd call the bitterness medium low or even low. This has less bitterness than, say, a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That's fine, that's what they're going for here. At 7%, I think it's a really nice balanced beer. I think if this was a higher alcohol beer, it would still be very nice, but then those like perfumey alcohol notes could bring something to the table, but they might start to actually kind of counteract and maybe get a little like kind of heavy and like kind of tiring and even honestly a little boring. But I think at this level of intensity in terms of the hop character and then that little supportive malt character with a little touch of this like very subtle alcohol warmth that's pretty pleasant, honestly. It has like this nice perfumey sort of floral character to it. I think it works really well. It definitely passes that test of, yes, I would finish this and probably want another, which is the true test of a great beer. In terms of this beer, this does come from a 4-pack of other beers, so I do have other ones to try, and I will do that later, but those will be just more of kind of a quick review. I wanted to do a longer review on Thiols and Phantasm and Biotransformation and taste this great beer. I highly recommend it. I will leave a link to the brewery and to the articles down below. And thanks for joining me, and we will see you next time.